Petrie center point. Drouin will give it back to him from the left circle. The shot, and that hit somebody in front of the net. Drouin will come down and get it. Gallagher posted at the side of the goal. There's a Petrie, and he shoots and scores. What a wrist shot as he beats Grubauer glove side. Drouin with the assist, the power play goal, and the Canadians are on the board first. Turning is Delorier, gets to the boards, and he'll roll that down the ice, racing after Pacioretty. Gets it left circle. Pacioretty waiting for reinforcements. Pacioretty gets loose behind the net, but the defenseman fell. He'll go back to Van. Jordy Van for Jurevec. Shoots it. Low and wide. Here's a chance at Byron. Shoots and scores. Empty net. Placanitz. He finds Pacioretty. And what a back check by Oshie. But he's going to take it. That's going to be a goal. And he scores. Pacioretty scores.
10 seconds.
Down by Oshie. That would have been a goal, I'm sure. But Pacioretty grabbed it, puts home his second of the night, his 14th, and it's 3-1 half.
Hey, that's how it went down last night. The Montreal Canadiens, you never know which version of that team's going to show up from night to night as they laid an egg, as their coach said, after the game on, Wednesday night against the Boston Bruins. A busy week for the Habs. So they played Saturday, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they're playing again tonight. On Hockey Day in Canada from the Bell Center, they will host the Boston Bruins as those two teams meet for the third time in a week. And the Bruins have had a front row seat to the Jekyll and Hyde Canadians as the Habs look pretty good, showing up against them last Saturday night and then just looked atrocious against them at TD Garden on Wednesday night. Welcome to Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. I am the host of the show. It's nice to be with you. We are on Facebook Live. We are on Periscope. We are on YouTube Live, and the show, as always, is streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com, where you can find old episodes of the show and old segments of the show. I'm Conor McKenna out of Montreal, and Laura Saba is the producer of the program. Laura is here with me right now. Hello, Laura.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, thanks. The weather is great. A week ago, we had 14 inches of snow, and it was like minus 20. And today it's like around 0 and all the snow is gone. So we saw sunshine today in Montreal, which was a welcome change of pace as well. So I'm feeling pretty good.
Yeah, it was great. And it's good to be back in studio. I did not make it out of my house last week with all the warnings. I got a little bit scared. So.
As I was saying on the show, if Urgence Santé is putting out warnings telling people do not leave your home, I think that's legit. Like, I think that is a legitimate thing. Like, of course, I couldn't call my work and say that I can't come in because Urgence Santé told me not to. But it's been bad. The traffic's been bad. The potholes are bad. And Montreal's sort of notorious for its potholes and bad roads. Usually, though, it's over the course of a long winter. It'll be in February and March that you really start seeing these awful, awful potholes. But we've this year accelerated it because we've had 4 major snow removal operations in Montreal already this year. And it's still only mid-January, but the roads are terrible. I mean, everybody knows somebody who's blown out a tire, probably. I've come very close. I've hit potholes big enough on the highway, and you're going 100, hitting a pothole. Of course, I always obey the speed limits, but it can be frightening. So anyway, nice to be back here with you, and we've got the Canadians tonight hosting the Boston Bruins, and this takes on special significance tonight as well with the news that longtime Montreal Canadiens beat writer with the Montreal Star, I should say, and then the Montreal Gazette, Red Fisher, passed away, and I would imagine that the Canadians will pay tribute to the truly legendary sports writer before the game tonight. So that's something that's going to be worth keeping an eye on. And it's always worth watching a Montreal-Boston game. And I got a few things I want to say about Mr. Fisher, and I'll get to that later on in this hour. But right now, we'll stick with the on-ice play for the Canadians. In this hour, we're also going to get to the Vegas Golden Knights. We are going to talk a little bit about the Nashville Predators, who are on top of that insane Central Division. And finally, we will pay tribute to Red Fisher in this hour as well. But let's start with the Jekyll and Hyde Canadians. And this team that last night got a 3-2 win over the Washington Capitals in Washington. And Max Pacioretty had a 3-point night. And it really does seem, and I don't think it's true anymore, because I believe Max Pacioretty did score a goal in a game the Canadians did not win. But he's got 6 goals in his last 6 games. And the stat was, for the longest time, when Pacioretty scores, the Canadians are undefeated. The problem was he hasn't scored very many goals. And that's why the Canadians have more losses. Well, that's one of the reasons why the Canadians have more losses than wins this season. But this team truly does seem to go as Pacioretty goes. This is more and more obvious night in, night out. And I'll give you examples of this, right? Saturday night, Pacioretty had a good game against Boston. Monday night, played pretty well against the Islanders. Wednesday in Boston, I mean, he was invisible. I don't know what happened or who this guy was, and the whole team sort of followed suit. Who knows? I mean, I don't know if they ate some bad pork chops or, beans or something, whatever people eat in Boston. But the team was just so bad on Wednesday. It was this atrocious performance, much like you'll remember if you're a Montreal fan, you watched them play the San Jose Sharks at home a couple of weeks ago. Very bad, just very bad. The effort's just not there. And you start hearing people talk about Pacioretty, and this is what happens in a market like this, right? There's a lot of scrutiny, and I know that other markets love their teams and scrutinize their teams, but take Toronto as an example. Toronto does have the Raptors as an example. They've also got the Blue Jays. They've got TFC, and I know that Montreal has an MLS team, but you get what I'm saying here, right? It's the only show in town. And the talk on Montreal radio on Thursday and on Friday was about Max Pacioretty dogging it, that Max Pacioretty was dogging it, and people were noticing, and that the word was sort of going up around the league that Pacioretty was sort of coasting his way to the bench. Just for example, right, that if the opposing team is breaking into the zone, you probably shouldn't be going on a line change to begin with, but you definitely shouldn't be lollygagging your way to the bench. And the word was that that's sort of what Pacioretty was doing. And I don't know if he heard that, and that's what woke him up last night, but he was the Canadiens' best player by a country mile, although their best players were their best players. Claude Julien on Wednesday night after the Boston game, after Julien's homecoming, remember, his first game back in Boston since being fired by the Bruins, and of course, we all know how well the Bruins have done since replacing Julien with Bruce Cassidy. This game had special significance for the coach. You'd have to think so. And lo and behold, excuse me, after the game, he's asked if his team has quit on him. And not only was he asked that, he didn't say no. He said, you would have to ask them. You got to ask the players. I'm not the right guy to ask that question to. Wow. I mean, that's a bombshell answer from a coach who's less than 1 year into his tenure in charge of this team. It was February 14th. It was Valentine's Day last year that he took over. And he's fielding questions. It's something to ask a coach after game 45 or 46, I guess it was. If their team has quit on you, it's another matter entirely if the coach doesn't categorically say no, that they have not quit on us, on me. I was shocked by that, and then you saw the effort that they put together last night. Now, granted, this is a Washington team that looked to have a sort of a disinterested Alexander Ovechkin in the game, Philip Grubauer in goal. So once again, the Canadiens are getting the backup goaltenders. It seems like a running storyline, and don't think that the players don't notice that they keep getting the backups. It says something about this pop gun offense that teams don't fear them. It's a good night to give the goalie the night off and feel like you've got a good chance at picking up a point or two against this Montreal team. But after all that, after what Julien said on Wednesday night in Boston, in this meaningful game, and it's always meaningful between the Canadiens and the Bruins, but as we mentioned, Claude Julien's first game back. On Friday night in Washington, these guys showed up and had themselves a game. And now, well, what's going to happen tonight? I mean, your guess is as good as mine. They were the biggest underdogs on the NHL schedule in that Boston game the other night. It was 2.5 to 1. Anyway, that's the odds that I saw. And I figured you'd see the Canadiens show up. They show up in Boston, right? And then they lay an egg. The coach's word, they lay an egg. Washington on Friday night, Carl Alzner's homecoming. They show up and they have a great game. A great moment in the game last night, too, if you didn't see it. I mean, remember, Alzner played in Washington for the last 10 years or so, but Alzner takes a penalty in this game and then skates to the home penalty box, just a force of habit style, right? I mean, he's been playing there for so long, and it's like muscle memory, right? And he goes to the wrong penalty box and had to be sort of reminded, no, you're on the other side now, bud. So he had a decent night, too, but, there was positives and there was negatives, but overall, Jonathan Drouin played a good game. Alex Galchenyuk played a good game. When those guys are showing up and playing, the Canadiens have a chance of winning. The problem is those nights seem to be sort of few and far between, or it's a night where one of them shows up, but never all three of them at the same time. And this is not a team that can afford to take nights off or have important players take nights off. It's amazing, though, really, how much it seems to me, and I don't know how much of a believer I am in the whole importance of the captaincy, how significant it is that your captain is this guy or that guy. I'm not sure. I don't know. I've never played pro hockey. I can't say for sure. I'd like to think that it's significant, but who knows? But he is really, the Canadians go as he goes. It appears to be more and more obvious to me. The more games I watch him play, the more games I watch this team play, when Pacioretty's on, the team goes. And this is with, of course, trade rumors swirling around the guy in a big way, right? Everybody's been hearing about him, and he's number 5 on TSN's trade bait list, compiled by Frank Saravalli at tsn.ca. So you have that going on here as well. And don't think a guy doesn't know about that. This guy's got a couple of young kids. He just recently bought a home here in Montreal, in the city. Not too far from the Bell Center. He's got a wife at home. He's trying to go out there and live his life and do his job. But imagine, with you're thinking about maybe your children are going to be starting school. You're putting roots down here for life. Meanwhile, you've got trade rumors swirling around you in a big way. I still don't see it happening. I don't see the Canadians trading Max Pacioretty, and I'll be surprised if they do. But it on the surface, and I know that this is a team that's made inexplicable moves now for a couple of years, so I wouldn't put it past them. But if I'm Jeff Molson, I don't trust Marc Bergevin to trade Max Pacioretty and get the proper return for the guy. How could you, based on his trade record in the last couple of years? You're talking about blockbuster deals that have not looked very good on aggregate. And anyway, if you've listened to this show, you know that I'm on record as being quite vocally opposed to the Subban for Weber trade. And that aside, the Drouin trade, I'm in a wait and see mode. But right now, it doesn't look very good, does it? It's again, you don't want to judge the trade less than a full season into it. But so far, based on the 45 or so game sample size for the two players, Mikhail Sergachev in Tampa, Jonathan Drouin in Montreal, the Tampa Bay Lightning robbed the Canadians blind. And maybe Jonathan Drouin figures it out. Probably Jonathan Drouin figures it out. But then again, you've got a general manager who just publicly admitted that he traded his top prospect for a player that he thought was going to be a number one center. And it took 41 games for him to admit that this guy is not only not a number one center, he's not a center at all. He's a winger. It doesn't look good. So if I'm Jeff Molson, am I trusting Marc Bergevin to make that trade? No. Not after what's happened here. But at the same time, it's a strange way of running a team. I think there's fans in this market that maybe think that Marc Bergevin deserves more of a chance, maybe another season to figure this thing out. I would be surprised if that happens. I don't think he's going anywhere now. I think that in the offseason, we'll probably see a move. But I don't see how. If somebody gets you into a terrible situation, I'll try to pull an analogy out of my rear end here, but if somebody is your navigator and that person navigates your boat into an iceberg, maybe you don't want that same person trying to navigate you to shore afterwards. Maybe you get somebody else to do the navigating. It's like digging a hole. You keep going. You're just going to keep going deeper and deeper and deeper. And the more time is spent, the more moves that this guy makes, the deeper the hole that the next guy is going to have to get out of. And it's going to be significant because this team, not only are they bad at the NHL level, they're bad at the AHL level, they're bad at the prospect level, they're prospect poor. They have a very important draft coming up. And who knows if where they're even going to be, right? They keep performing like they did last night. They'll manage to miss the playoffs and have a bad draft pick. So anyway, fascinating times, sort of to quote Austin Matthews, maybe sort of a tipping point for the Canadians right now. Coming up, we're going to talk about the Vegas Golden Knights. I've got my Canadians monologue out of the way. Let's talk about the Vegas Golden Knights, the best story in the National Hockey League this season. Very much looking forward to that. Danny Webster is going to be joining us. The first time we've had a chance to chat with him. I like that he has this in his Twitter bio, as Laura pointed out to me here. No, I don't know why the Vegas Golden Knights are good. It's an amazing story. You've got the greatest expansion team since the dawn of the National Hockey League, and they just keep on going. Do you see them give it to the Tampa Bay Lightning the other day? This team's no joke, and I will happily admit that I was wrong. I love being wrong. So we'll talk with Danny Webster. He covers the Vegas Golden Knights, and he's on the other side for NHL.com. So some Knights talk in this hour. Also coming up, we're going to chat with Chris Martel. We'll talk Nashville Predators. Stick around. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio, streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Periscope.
Smith to feed it back to center ice. Theodore up ice, driving down the wing, feeds it in front, score! What a pass by Theodore to William Karlsson for his 25th of the season, and he's tied it at 2. Now James Neal with a lead pass. Howla gains a line with Perron. Howla looking, Neal out top.
10 seconds.
Shot, score! What a beautiful goal for James Neal, and that's 10 straight 20-goal seasons, and he's tied it at 3.
Yes, sir. That's the Vegas Golden Knights getting the job done. And, well, you can't win them all, right? And who'd have thought, right? You're going to beat the Tampa Bay Lightning, but you're not going to beat the Florida Panthers. This is why I don't bet on hockey. I have no idea why things are happening. I told you that the bubble was going to burst. The Vegas Golden Knights, there's no way. This is an expansion team. It's never happened before. Expansion teams are bad. Not this time. Well, I mean, we're almost 50 games into the season. I think it is time for me to admit that I was wrong. This team not only looks like they're going to be in the playoffs, it looks like they're going to have a home playoff series in the first round. Just an incredible story, although it does create some interesting questions and some a fascinating quandary for George McPhee as the trade deadline gets ever closer. Are you buying or are you selling? Because you were definitely planning on selling. There's no way you can tell me George McPhee is not shocked by what's happening with the team. They weren't supposed to be good. They were supposed to get a great draft pick. He was probably thinking Rasmus Dahlin before the season started, but now here they are. Anyway, let's get some answers. The correspondent for NHL.com, the Vegas Golden Knights correspondent for NHL.com, and with SB Nation's NHL coverage as well, Danny Webster is on the line. Hello.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. I'm looking at your Twitter bio. No, I don't know why the Vegas Golden Knights are winning. So is that still true? You don't have an answer for me?
I do not have an answer, and a lot of people have been asking me that question for the better part of 2 months now, and I still don't know. Obviously last night was probably a really tough way to lose that game, but the fact that they're still winning more than they're losing, I still don't know what's going on.
It's and not only that, right? I mean, here's another hypothetical. Like if I had told you that Marc-Andre Fleury is going to miss the first 35 games of the season, or something like thereabouts, right? And that not only that their second string and third string guys are going to get injured for a significant period of time as well. I mean, that it just makes it that much crazier that they've been going with totally unheralded goaltending for a big portion of the season and kept winning despite that.
And the other weird thing about that is a lot of people forget when the Golden Knights also grabbed Calvin Pickard from the expansion draft, they ended up trading him. And they traded him to get an unproven Malcolm Subban that a lot of people from Boston really weren't even that high on. So now you're rolling with a young backup goaltender that not a lot of people know about. Then you have to bring on 2 more guys from the AHL that have really no NHL experience. And thanks to the wizardry of Dave Pryor, the goaltending coach, they were able to stay afloat for as long as Fleury was out. And now that Fleury's back, he's playing some of the best hockey of his career. None of this makes sense. It should, but it doesn't.
And I'd be curious to get your take on what I was saying there about George McPhee. Like, what do you think his reaction is to this? I mean, everybody wants to win, I'm sure, but in a way, this is like not going according to plan, right?
That's exactly right. And the consensus among all of us when the season started was the way they compiled this roster of expiring contracts and guys and unproven young guys was that maybe that they were going to be big time sellers at the trade deadline. But if you had told George McPhee that you would have the top point mark in the Western Conference, heading into the second half of the season, obviously I'm sure he would take it. But at the same time, I really think that he is as shocked as everyone else that this team has been able to play as well as it has. And they're getting contributions from everybody down the line. And it seems like every night there's somebody else stepping up and playing a game that's determining the factor of a game. And whether it's William Karlsson, Jonathan Marchessault, Eric Holla, whoever it is, it seems like every night someone else is stepping up. And it's the reason why this team is playing as well as it is.
And I guess it provides hope for future expansion teams too. You can sort of, because I remember I don't want to speak for everybody. I snickered and a lot of people did when the league sort of claimed, oh, no, we're going to do an expansion draft in such a way that's going to allow them to contend right away. And then you looked at the names that were available and you're like, really? I mean, I don't know. Let's see. But yes, William Karlsson apparently is a superstar who they should be signing to, I would imagine, a long-term contract at some point. But then you've got other examples like James Neal, right? For sure, when they plucked James Neal, the thought was this is going to be a great guy to move at the deadline and get something in return. Do you think that's still the plan? Can you conceive of them moving Neal, who's been one of the many players producing this season? He's got a long track record. Of course, tons of teams would love to have him, but Vegas would love to have him too, right? I mean, this is a guy who also has a track record of scoring in the playoffs, and that's something that they are going to need in a couple of months.
Right. I think the best way to put that is if it ain't broke, don't fix it. If the Golden Knights weren't where they are and Neal's scoring 20 goals, obviously you want to move him. But I don't see any conceivable reason as to why the Golden Knights should even think about entertaining any trade offers for James Neal. I mean, there have been talks about the Golden Knights working on an extension with Neal. I believe it was SportsNet that made that report about a couple of weeks ago that they're looking at possibly keeping Neal for the long term. And obviously you got to, the whole logistics of money and the years and how you balance that out. And, McPhee probably doesn't want to give him a long-term contract of anything more than 4 or 5 years. So, it's interesting depending on, I think it'll dictate how the negotiations, if there are any negotiations. I don't want to, assume and say that there are talks going on between James Neal and the Golden Knights, but if there are leading up to the trade deadline, you got to think that if there's something close that they can kind of agree on, that they can wait it out and possibly work on something toward the end of the season. But if there's possibly a way that they're way off on negotiations, maybe the trade talks start. But right now, I just don't see that happening. I think Neal is too vital to what this team wants to do if they want to contend later this spring.
So, and then by extension, this is a team that right now doesn't, they're rich in second round picks next year and the year after that, but this year they've only got one. They don't have a third this year. They do have a first and a second, but I'm sure the plan, again, to go back to the plan, the quote unquote plan for George McPhee, I'm sure, based on the fact that they stockpiled a lot of draft picks in the next couple of years, is to build this team through the draft. So how do you think that sort of works with things going not going, I should say, according to plan as the deadline looms? I mean, you're saying it. I mean, they're going to be buyers, right, at deadline time, and they're on pace, according to CapFriendly.com, to have about $19 million in trade deadline cap space. That's a lot of salary they could potentially add, right?
That is a lot. And you know what? I think if the Golden Knights did not hit home runs with who they drafted last year with Cody Glass, Nick Suzuki, and Eric Brandstrom, I think that they would definitely entertain trying to get more top draft picks at the trade deadline. I think getting those three guys last summer, combined with the fact that they're winning right now, I think they realize that they have enough in the tank to where if they want to start planning for the future and they want to bring those young guys into the fold, I think it works out greatly. And then you can worry about where to plug them into the roster later on. But like you said, they have a lot of cap space for the deadline. And if they want to make a move, they want to add another bottom six forward who can, get them some more production offensively. They could definitely do that. If they want to go ahead and get somebody that can contribute on the power play, because God knows right now they need some power play help, they can go ahead and do that too. They have options, and I think it's good to have more than just the typical selling option, and realize that you have multiple ways you can go on improving this team if you're serious about contending.
What about William Karlsson? Do you think they're going to get something done with him before he hits RFA status? Any rush on that? Do you know if the player might be wanting to sort of wait it out, because obviously he's going to cash in?
Yeah, I think that it's imperative for the Golden Knights to get something done with him. He has just been I don't know, and you kind of alluded to it earlier, I don't know if people quite realize just how insane of a season he is having, considering he had 6 goals, I believe it was, all of last year, and now he's got 25. It still boggles my mind how he didn't make the All-Star team. But I think that there is definitely mutual interest on both sides from what I've heard, that Karlsson definitely wants to stay, and George McPhee, when I had a chance to talk to him after they signed Jonathan Marchessault to the 6-year extension worth $30 million, and I asked him, he said, what's the plan next? And obviously he's kind of gone away from what I expected after locking up Derek Englund, John Merrill to year extensions. But he said that he wants to keep that first line together. And obviously Riley Smith's locked up for the next few years, and they got Marchessault, and they'll have him locked up into his 30s. So getting William Karlsson locked up, I would think would be the next move, but there are a lot of different directions they can go. But I think there's definitely mutual interest on both sides that they want to get a deal done. Wild
Bill Karlsson, what a story! At 25 years old, and just as you mentioned, 25 goals. Guys on pace for 40 plus, maybe 45. 50 maybe. That seems like something pretty crazy, but it's just part of this sort of amazing story that's happening out there in the desert. Before I let you go, who do you think is going to be the first captain in Vegas Golden Knights franchise history? You got 4 guys with A's right now. Anyone you think you see as a future captain on that roster now?
If they want to go that route next year, I think Derek Englund might be the first one, just because he's, the Vegas resident. He's lived here the longest. I think if they wanted to go that route next year, I think giving him the C would be the right way to go. I think down the road, I think best captain they could go with would be Alex Tuck. I think he's a young guy, very mature, very well spoken, and he's blossoming into one of the best young forwards in the game. So I think next year will be England. Down the road, I can definitely see Tuck being one of those guys wearing the C for the Golden Knights.
Cool. Hey, thanks for your time. Really do appreciate it.
I appreciate you having me on. Thanks a lot.
That's Danny Webster, NHL.com, covering the Vegas Golden Knights. You can read him at SB Nation as well, covering the National Hockey League. This is Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. Happy Hockey Day in Canada to you. Are you having a good one so far? A lot of games. So you got one in progress right now. And coming up next, we're going to talk about one of the hottest teams in the game right now. They're on top of the Central Division. It's the Nashville Predators. Chris Martel of Fox Sports Tennessee on the other side to talk Preds. This is Hockey Primetime here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com.
Smith, 10 shootout scores in his career at the Predators. Breaks into the left side, and he scores! Predators win the game by a final of 3-2.
Yeah, that's the Nashville Predators getting it done again. Hey, they're not all going to be works of art, but they pick up 2 points against the lowly Arizona Coyotes at Bridgestone Arena. That was on Thursday night. You got Kyle Turris, and that was Craig Smith with the winner, scoring goals in the shootout. 4 in a row for the Predators. That they are killers at home, 15-4-2, first place in the Central Division. It's been a good year. Now they've got Ryan Ellis back. He had a goal and an assist in that game, and Ellis is firing, and they've been tearing it up without Ellis all year long. So, well, watch out. That is a crazy division, the Central Division in the National Hockey League. I mean, the Blackhawks, people talk about the demise of the Blackhawks. The Blackhawks aren't that bad. If you look at their record, it's not that bad. It's just that the division is so strong that they sort of find themselves on the outside looking in. With more on the hottest team in that division and one of the hotter teams in the league right now, we welcome Chris Martel back to the show from Fox Sports Tennessee, covering the Preds. Hello, Chris.
Hey, Connor, how are you?
I'm well, thanks, and thanks for making time for us here today. This is that's a good-looking Preds team. I mean, look, this was a Stanley Cup finalist a year ago. in a way, though, and I know that they didn't really hit their stride until the playoffs last year. Is this a better team this year than they were a year ago?
Yeah, I really think they are, and I think you can look at maybe the addition of Kyle Turris as really the piece that put them over the top. Last season, they go into the final without the services of Ryan Johansson, and they lose to Pittsburgh in 6 games. And I think if you had seen a Predators team with a player like Kyle Turris in that lineup who could have taken over for Ryan Johansson, it may have been a different outcome. So now you have a Predators lineup that it's pretty healthy. They're, of course, suffering a couple injuries right now. Forsberg's been out of the lineup for a few games. Arvidsson, who had been out for the past 2, is going to be back in tonight against the Panthers. And there's a chance that Matthias Ekholm could be missing too. So injuries here and there, but they're still firing on all cylinders. Four wins in a row, and nothing really phases this team. So, I mean, are they better than last year? Absolutely, I think they are.
And that was it. I mean, I think back on the Stanley Cup final, and it was almost as if they ran out of centermen. Like, God bless Colton Sissons, but I don't know if you want him centering your top line necessarily. And there's always a danger of that happening after the sort of daunting task that is going 4 rounds in the Stanley Cup playoffs. But I guess that's it. I mean, they seem much better suited to that exact situation that you alluded to. Also with Bonino up the middle as well, right?
Absolutely. And, like I said just a minute ago, the Predators didn't have the depth in down the middle that they do now. They go out during the free agency, they pick up Nick Bonino, who has been, he probably could be doing more for the Predators, but he's been stabilizing the bottom 6 in terms of the center position. That's crazy, thinking that Nick Bonino is going to be kind of just holding strength on the 3rd or 4th line and wherever they need him to be. You have Ryan Johansson, Kyle Turris, Nick Bonino, Colton Sissons, and if you want, you also have Calle Yarncrook. You also have potentially Austin Watson if you want to slot him in the middle. So Nashville has a overload of center now in case anything were to happen come down the line. So I think they're more prepared than they were last year, for sure.
It seemed like when Ryan Ellis finally did come back from his injury, that and I'm, of course, not following this team as closely as you are, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but they lost a couple of games right when he came back, right? And I'm sure that's it's just a coincidence. I'm not suggesting that they started losing games because Ryan Ellis was back in the lineup, but those days seem to be sort of long gone. Is Ellis hitting that stride again?
Yeah, they did. They lost a couple when he came back, but in the same regard, I still think he's hitting his stride right now. I mean, he had 2 fantastic points in the game against Arizona on Thursday, a beautiful pass that was almost the full length of the ice to hit Scott Hartnell for a breakaway. And then he scores the game-tying goal with just a handful of minutes to go in regulation, and they finally won it in the shootout. And when you look at what Ellis does on the ice, you don't really – he has a lot of – he's a big guy in a small package, I guess is the best way to describe Ryan Ellis. And it's just all the things he does, all the way he covers the blue line and the way he contains in the neutral zone, he makes him makes the Predator probably one of the Predators' stoutest defensemen, even though he's probably their smallest defenseman. And just having his presence on the blue line in the top 4, it just says words for what he does on the ice.
And meanwhile, you look at the situation that they've got there on the blue line. They got a big number in $9 million for Subban, but he's 28 years old, still in the prime years of his career. And it doesn't really matter when you have so many good contracts. I don't know if there's a team in this league that has more good contracts than the Preds do. Roman Josi, dude's a Norris contender annually, $4 million for each of the next 3 seasons. Are you kidding me? 5 seasons for Matthias Ekholm at $3.75 million, and Ellis that they're going to have to get something done there eventually, but $2.5 million this year and next. And you look up and down. I mean, that's just the defenseman. Up front, they've got great contracts with guys like Victor Arvidsson. I mean, Arvidsson for $4.25. There's so many good contracts. It's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. And that's just what David Boyle does. You sit there, and every time you see a contract come in, like, oh boy, Ellis, he gets signed for, it feels like it's dirt cheap, and then Roman Josi is the same way. And then every new contract that comes in, you're like, well, I couldn't be any more shocked. And then you see the next one, you're like, man, how does he do it? And then, when you talk about a big contract player like a PK Subban, I don't really think you look at those numbers, because those numbers are going to have to be spent somewhere in that lineup. And when you have a guy who is a perennial all-star and is equally a Norris candidate, just like Roman Josi, you're going to have to dish out that money somewhere. And their money's going to both Subban and Forsberg. And eventually it's going, and of course the Pecorine contract is coming off the books here in about a year. So, that kind of money is going to be spent somewhere. But just the way that David Poile does those contracts, it's just unbelievable to see how much they're paying out and the return they're getting for that value.
And the other thing is the stability, right? I'm looking at the cap-friendly page right now. You've got, Scott Hartnell's a UFA, 35 years old at the end of this year. 33-year-old Cody McLeod, UFA, and Alexei Emlin's contract is up as well. Other than that, every other player, right down to guys like Yannick Weber and Matt Irwin, who just recently signed extensions, are locked up. I mean, they also sort of they're good now, and it appears that they're going to be largely the same with their best players in their prime years for the foreseeable future. I mean, an incredible amount of contract stability as well, isn't there?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think David Poile has always talked about is the window of opportunity. And people look at that across the league with multiple teams, and you say, well, this team, their window of opportunity is closing. But Nationals, I mean, with this kind of contract stability, you don't see a lot of that across the league. And just having that window of opportunity stay open for 3, 4, 5 years with the multitude of this entire roster staying intact, I mean, that's great for of course, it's bad for the minor league guys that want to try to break into the roster. But for a team like Nashville that got to the Stanley Cup final last year and could easily get back to at least the Western Conference final this year, I mean, just says Nashville's going to be this team for a while.
It's and they're fun to watch. As fun as a 1-0 game can be. I was watching them the other night. I guess it was the Vegas game, and UC Saros is getting peppered. Guy's 22 years old, and you mentioned Pecorine. I wonder. I mean, he looks so good in that game that I found myself wondering if this guy is a future number one. You see a lot more of him than I do. What's your feeling on that?
The big thing about UC Saros that everybody really harps on, I guess, is his size. He's a very short goaltender, but he started out the season with 3 straight losses, and people kind of wondered, well, is this the guy that's going to be the next in line once Rene leaves the team or whatever happens in that situation? Well, UC Saros goes for a little conditioning down in Milwaukee, plays some games down there, comes back up and plays a game or two here and there. And he's had 3 straight home shutouts in his last 3 starts in Bridgestone Arena. And he has just been absolutely phenomenal. He's one of only 2 rookie goaltenders in the entire NHL history to post multiple 40-save wins in his rookie year. I mean, this kid is phenomenal to watch. And just the saves that he makes, you sit there and you wonder, how does he do it? And for him being 22 years old, it just shows you that what the scouting department's able to do and what they're able to find in these goaltending prospects. And absolutely, I believe he is the future to come for the Nashville Predators in goal.
What about the fact that, and I know, I mean, everybody loves Pecorine and with good reason, but the fact that he couldn't, now, I may be misremembering, but he couldn't win a game on the road in the Stanley Cup final last year, right? I mean, he would be sort of lights out at home and just kind of bad on the road. Is there any concern going back with Stanley Cup aspirations that he did sort of, I thought maybe had some question marks in the playoffs last year?
It's primarily just Pittsburgh, and that's the interesting thing is that Pecorine has never beat Pittsburgh in Pittsburgh. I mean, it's the exact opposite of him going to Edmonton. He never loses in Edmonton, but he just cannot beat the Penguins in Pittsburgh. And I don't know if that's something that's gotten into his head or if it's just that team form. But I don't know if the Preds and if it becomes a Nashville Predators Pittsburgh Penguin final again this season. I'm sure Peter Laviolette's going to look at that and go, well, I don't really know if we're going to go the same route we did last time. But it's a good thing about having a player like UC Saros being able to play in net. I don't know if he's going to get much time come the playoffs, but if they put him in net, he's going to do well. But Pecorino, he's got all the confidence in the world, especially from the coaching staff. So maybe if that happens again this year, it'll be a little different.
It would be, imagine they're in the Stanley Cup final and game 3 comes around and like, yeah, so this year we're going to use Saros for games 3 and 4. We'll get Pekka back in there for game 5. Pekka, you wait here in Nashville. We'll go take care of business. I mean, that would be unprecedented. Would truly be something else. And we'll see, right? It looked like the Pittsburgh might not make the playoffs there for a while. Now they're rolling. That is a Stanley Cup final I would be willing to watch again this year. Chris, thanks for your time, man. I really do appreciate it. Love talking Preds with you. Cheers.
Cheers. My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
That is Chris Martel. The Nashville Predators are in action tonight at 8 o'clock. They're hosting the Florida Panthers. They just played the Panthers. Now they're playing them again, right? It's a home and home, I guess they call those, right? And they're getting those games against the Panthers out of the way. And am I forgetting? Am I getting confused? I might be getting confused. Yes, right. Vegas was last night. Do I have a problem with Vegas and Nashville, like some sort of like uniform confusion or something like that? It's possible that I might have that going on. Anyway, yes, the Panthers are in Nashville to take on the Preds. We mentioned the record; they're 15-4-2 at home. The only that's another thing they have in common with the Vegas Golden Knights. They don't tend to lose games at home. Coming up next, we will pay tribute to a legend after Red Fisher and learning of Red Fisher's passing, the legendary Montreal Canadiens beat reporter. I'll talk a little bit about Red, what he meant to me as a hockey fan growing up here in Montreal and as a member of the media in this town as well. That's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime here on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Hey, welcome back. This is Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. Ahead of tonight's action in the National Hockey League, it's a busy day in the NHL. Saturday always is, but it is also a hockey day in Canada, so all the Canadian NHL franchises are in action, and many of them are playing against one another, including, as we speak right now, the Jets and Flames in a shootout tied up at 1-1. Matthew Perreault, he's having a nice little season there. 14 goals for the Winnipeg Jets, and TJ Brodie scored for Calgary. So that game's going to a shootout. And in the books already, we got a couple of scores. The Stars just exposing the Buffalo Sabres 7-1. Wow, that is a big number. And the Flyers beat the Devils 3-1 in a eventful game, I guess you could say, to say the least. And how about the Colorado Avalanche? We talked about the Central Division. This Avalanche team, if they were in a different division, would be in a playoff spot. They've got 55 points this season. They're 26, 16, and 3. And how is this happening? They have basically the same roster that they had a year ago, except this time it's truly Nathan McKinnon's team. He's got 23 goals on the season, and as I mentioned last year, is right there in the last week, I should say, right there in the Hart Trophy conversation. So a real nice story there this year in Colorado. They didn't make any significant roster changes other than trading Matt Duchene in season, and that truly is sort of looking like an addition by subtraction situation. You know, it's probably oversimplifying it to say, but geez, I mean, look what Colorado's done since trading Duchene, and look what Ottawa's done since acquiring Duchene. Ottawa's been one of the worst teams in the NHL, and Colorado's been one of the hotter ones. Fascinating thing. So I wanted to mention this because tonight the Montreal Canadiens, and this is something to look forward to for me, maybe as much as the game. The Habs will pay tribute at the Bell Center to Red Fisher, who passed away. And we learned of his passing yesterday, and he a great little cartoon from Aislinn in the Montreal Gazette today. And if you're a Montrealer, if you're a Montreal sports fan, especially an English-speaking one, but I think he is one of the rare sort of people who crossed across language lines here in this market. Red Fisher was 91 years old, and only stepped away from writing about the Canadiens just a couple of years ago. So I'm for me, this is year 10 of covering the Canadiens, and it's year 30. I don't know, probably 30. I'm 35 years old, probably year 30 of me reading about the Montreal Canadiens. And when I was a kid, it was Red Fisher. I mean, that was the byline. You'd see Red's name there in the Montreal Gazette sports section, and that's what you would read. He was the guy. He was on the beat. He was the guy traveling with the team, and did so since 1955. 1955 until 2012. The guy covered the team for 57 years, and there's great stories. I mean, they're legendary, but the perhaps the most legendary is of, he's an old school guy, right? The first game he ever covered was the Rocket Richard riot on March 17th, 1955. That was the first game he covered, the Rocket Richard riot game. I mean, as Michael Farber wrote, he knew how to make an entrance. And if you haven't read Michael Farber's obituary of Red Fisher, it doesn't get much better than that when it comes to sports writing and being sort of immortalized by, I'd say, the greatest living hockey writer in Farber. Just an incredible tribute that appeared in the Montreal Gazette today. But Red Fisher, one of my favorite stories was the legendary, and you've probably heard it in the last couple of days, but they used to initiate the beat guys who would cover the team, and that's what they did to Red Fisher. He's not a big guy. Right. And of course, I only knew him in his 80s. And to say that I knew him, I think it would probably not really be fair. I shared a table with him maybe once or twice while covering the Canadiens, and kept my mouth shut and sort of listened to what the guys had to say. But they grabbed him and initiated him by tying him down. And then Rocket Richard came out with a razor and shaved every hair on the guy's body. That was how they initiated Red Fisher and covering hockey. And they don't do that anymore. They don't do that to the beat guys anymore, but that's what they did back then. But just the writing style, and you would reading somebody like that your whole life, that's just it. That's
2 minutes.
It's a part of sort of the life of a hockey fan in Montreal, and the style, which Mitch Melnick did a great job of sort of capturing in his Good, the Bad, and the Ugly in The Athletic. You can read that. It went up this afternoon. And he really did sort of capture that curmudgeonly, the style that the guy had, right? Every writer has a style. And when you've been reading him your whole life, it's like you don't even think of it. It's just part and parcel. I don't think he ever spoke to me. He had this policy, never talk to rookies. And all I can say is I'm proud to have shared time in the press room and in the press gallery with a guy like that. The guy's a legend. He didn't compromise, and I can't emphasize this enough, that if you have not read it, you got to read the obituary that Michael Farber wrote for him. Wrote for his friend.
1 minute.
I mean, can you imagine to be paid tribute to in that fashion? Very, very moving and really, really good. But they don't make guys like Red Fisher anymore. They don't. Guy was a throwback, and that's pretty much it. And if I could have a fraction, a tenth, a 1/20th of the career that guy has had, I will certainly be very, very pleased. So the Canadians in action tonight, as they are 13th place in the Eastern Conference after Friday's win. 9 points behind the Penguins for that last playoff spot. Oh, yeah, just got to catch the Penguins, no problem. But looking forward very much to the Canadians paying tribute to Red Fisher tonight, and probably must-see TV for you. Coming up next, we've got hour number 2 right around the corner. We're talking Flyers with Dave Isaac. Nice to check in with Dave, so we'll be doing that in just a few minutes. Stick around. This is Hockey Primetime on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio, streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Did you read the obituary?
around to the right half wall. And Gudis bounces it off of John Ward, gets it side of the net. Here's in front, they score! King on the round in front right to Val Pilpula. And Pilpula's got his 10th of the year. 2-0 Philadelphia. Konechny pulls out to the high slot, still with the puck into the right circle. Took the shot, deflected on.
10 seconds.
The rebound, Provorov scores! Ivan Provorov makes it 3-0 Flyers with his 9th goal of the year.
All right. Yes, that was earlier today. The Philadelphia Flyers getting the job done and beating up on a rival team, taking on the New Jersey Devils. That was a 3-1 final. Travis Konechny had himself a game. And our next guest is joining us to talk a little bit about these Philadelphia Flyers. They're back in action tomorrow, 12:30 in the afternoon on a Sunday on NFL Championship weekend, no less. Seems like a little bit cruel and unusual. Anyway, let's see what our next guest makes of it. Covering the Philadelphia Flyers for the South Jersey Courier-Post. His name is Dave Isaac, back on the show with us here today. Hello, Dave.
Hey, Connor, good to be with you.
Yeah, and you as well. You as well. So I know that, and your latest just recently up. I saw you tweeted out there about 20 minutes ago, starting with the Flyers' top pairing. So let's start there. Shane Gostisbehere is a thrilling player to watch, but I guess, like many young defensemen, there has been some questions about his ability to be a quote-unquote responsible defensive player. But as you write, to top pairing now, him and Ivan Provorov, I guess he's sort of figured it out, hasn't he?
Yeah, those questions came more last year for Shane Gostisbehere than this year. It included a healthy scratch stint for him. And hindsight being 2020, we now know that he really wasn't able to skate very well. And you could kind of see that, but it became clear later in the season when him and Claude Giroux about the same time start to turn things up. They both had the same 2 surgeries to their groin and abdomen on the same day. So it makes sense now that maybe some of that had to do with his physical health. And this season, he's really been very good from the start. Certainly no healthy scratch stints, but has definitely been able to provide the offense and as you see now, able to provide the defense as well. And I think that's where he's made some serious strides, is with his play without the puck.
I mentioned Travis Konechny, a goal and an assist there today. Just 7 goals, though, on the season. And I know that hopes are high long-term for this guy, but why the low goal total?
Yeah, coming into the year, he didn't have as big of a role, and I think it just took him a while to get going. Opportunity being part of it, but also his play just wasn't very strong. And he's one of those kind of high-risk players where he'll make plays at the blue line that can go south really quick. And I think he's still trying to remove them from his game, but he's starting to play a little bit more responsibly. And Sean Couturier is the Flyers' #1 center and also their best defensive player. Claude Giroux is on that line as well, and another very responsible defensive player. And Dave Haxtell spoke about that after the game, that kind of the veteran presence of these 2 guys and the way that they play, he's hoping that rubs off on Konechny.
You mentioned Couturier, who has the unfortunate luck of sort of playing in the same era of maybe the greatest defensive forward of all time in Patrice Bergeron. But if he wasn't, I would imagine this is a guy who would be getting some serious talk, and I know that he is getting some Selke talk as the best defensive forward. Is he sort of in? Look, there's only one Patrice Bergeron. I think everybody would probably sort of agree about that, but is he sort of right there as a defensive forward, one tier below? And I mean, his offensive numbers are very good too, but is Couturier sort of up there, do you think?
Yeah, I think in years past, he's been kind of close defensively, but the offensive numbers weren't quite there. And I don't know if this is really out there or not, but the Professional Hockey Writers Association is going to do midterm grades, midterm awards around the time of the All-Star break. And I was looking at those numbers the other day to kind of make my pick there. And I think this is Couturier's best shot against Bergeron. I think the numbers are right there neck and neck. And as you said, Bergeron has the experience there. He's probably going to be the odds-on favorite. But if you watch the games and look at the numbers, I think that Sean Couturier might garner a little bit more of those votes at the end of the season. Of course, there's a whole basically second half of the season to play, but based on what we've seen already, I think they're kind of neck and neck, if not Couturier having the lead. This might be his best shot. I'll put it to you that way, certainly so far.
Well, and he's got a lot of good years ahead of him. I'm always sort of, it amazes me that he's as young as he is, given how long he's sort of been around, Couturier, and really sort of grown over the course of those years. Like I covered him and in junior, as I think I've told you before, and was always so impressed. He's one of those junior players who would just take over hockey games, right? And you knew he was sort of destined for special things. And then it was always sort of surprising, like, oh, they were so deep up the middle. I know when he was drafted, so he was sort of plugged into that defensive role. But I always wondered, was he going to get a chance to spread his wings offensively? And now we are finally seeing that happen, right? And you've got Claude Giroux also having sort of a, I don't know, it's like a rebirth of Claude Giroux that's happened this year, isn't it?
Yeah, I think you're right. When you think back to his days in Drummondville, he was certainly put in a position where he was asked to play that offense. And he'd kind of been pigeonholed, especially as a rookie, because he went into that playoff series as an 18-year-old against the Pittsburgh Penguins and did a really good job of getting Malkin. That was under Peter Laviolette. He played for Craig Berube as well, and now Dave Haxtell. And all three coaches had put him in a really defensive role, at least at first. And this is the first time that he's kind of been given a little bit more. There were times last year where he had been the second-line center, and it was a great debate here in Philadelphia. Is he a not-so-great second-line center or a really good third-line center? And apparently both options were wrong. He's a fantastic number one center as long as you give him good line mates. When you look back over the last several years, and he's been in the league now for 7 years or something, at some of the line mates he's had, he really hasn't had the opportunity to put up numbers just based on who he's been with. So certainly with Claude Giroux, and that was your original question, was Claude Giroux. Yeah, it's been a huge rebirth for him. And I think that as I kind of talked about with Gostisbehere, the physical part of it is a huge factor in why Claude Giroux is starting to play very well. And I think that moving him to the wing, he loses a little bit of the defensive responsibility and has the half wall to his back, which has made it a little bit easier for him to make plays. Both of those guys now putting up fantastic numbers.
And you mentioned that the sort of the defensive responsibilities, and Giroux himself has certainly never been a slouch in the sort of defensive forward department as well, right? But that's got to make all the difference in the world. I mean, he's still 30 years old, and I mean he's been around forever as well. It's a good thing to see. And then you've got Jacob Voracek, who's also like really good. So you've got a pretty nice looking nucleus there in Philadelphia. But meanwhile, they're also in both divisions, right? The Central Division out west and the Atlantic, the Metro, I should say. It's such a strong division, right? It's just such a grind to be one of those top 5 teams. I mean, it looks very much like it will be 5 teams from the Metro that get into the playoffs, but to be one of those top 5 teams, very difficult thing to do in this day and age, isn't it?
Yeah, and you talk about the playoff picture and those guys, Voracek, Couturier, and Giroux were the Flyers' top unit for a good portion of that first half of the season. They started to decline in that 10-game losing streak, and that's when Dave Haxtell broke them up and put Voracek on a different line. He's basically been with Michael Raffl and Valtteri Filppula ever since. But the Flyers haven't been in a playoff position since November 10th. And if they win tomorrow, I think barring what happens tonight, I think that if they win tomorrow, they could get back into a playoff spot because Washington is already that top seed in the Metro. And there's been a lot of change up there between the Devils, who had been playing so well for a while in Columbus, and now Washington being up there. It is crazy just how tight this division is. And the Flyers' schedule had been a little bit strange, too, because they had played the West so much in the first half of the season. I think they still have, after today, 18 of the 28 games still to play against Metropolitan Division teams. So the opportunity is certainly there in front of them if they're going to catch a lot of these teams ahead.
The Flyers at 52 points, nipping at the heels of both the Penguins and Rangers at 53, and just 3 points back of the Columbus Blue Jackets. 4 points back of the New Jersey Devils, who they beat today. So yeah, I mean that is a crazy race. And then you've got the Islanders sort of hot on their heels, only 2 points back. The Hurricanes 4 points behind the Flyers. So a total logjam in the Metropolitan Division, especially from sort of second to seventh place in that division. We're talking to Dave Isaac, covering the Philadelphia Flyers for the South Jersey Courier-Post. The Flyers, as we mentioned, were in action earlier today, winning 3-1 over the over the New Jersey Devils. And Eric Lindros got his number retired finally by the Flyers, and it was with the Toronto Maple Leafs in town, the appropriate opponent certainly for a night like that. What was it like seeing that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting, especially with this current Flyers bunch. Some of the more tenured guys have seen Eric Lindros way more than the organization had in the past 15 years before that. Wayne Simmons was talking about the year that the Flyers hosted the Rangers in the Winter Classic in 2012. That's when Paul Holmgren first reached out to Eric Lindros and said, let's try and bury the hatchet here and have you come back and play in the alumni game. That's really where everything kicked off. And obviously Lindros came back, played in that game, and I think the loudest cheers were for Eric Lindros, and that was a game that Bernie Perrant, strapped on the pads, and Bobby Clarke played. Eric Lindros had the biggest cheers that day, and last night or 2 nights ago, whatever it was now, was really a sight to see. They went all out for that. T-shirts on every seat with alternating orange and black so that you could spell out 88 there in the crowd, with black shirts among the orange. Huge display there with a banner being dropped down and kind of used as a projector with video running on that. And then that dropped, and Eric Lindros is standing there and gets a huge ovation for more than a minute until he goes into his speech. It was really kind of above and beyond, especially when you saw how the divorce went between the Flyers and Rangers in 2000.
Huh.
Or excuse me, the Flyers and Lindros.
Right.
Trading him for the Rangers.
With Dave Isaac here talking to Philadelphia Flyers. And given the way that Lindros's career ended, I'm curious, do you know if he has any interest in sort of being a spokesman or being involved in trying to reduce the impact of head trauma in the National Hockey League and talking about the sort of devastating effects of these injuries that are still all too common?
Yeah, he's actually playing a pretty big role in the Toronto area in terms of research, in terms of what they're trying to do to move things forward. And he was asked about what is going on in the league now, and he said they're still not doing enough. And one of the things that he brought up, and he had a media availability on multiple days, and he brought this up both times. He said what organizations really need to do is publish the failures just as much as they publish the positives that they find in their research, because that helps save time for somebody else so that they don't have to make the same mistake. He has been trying to do a lot. He's donated a lot of money, I know. I'm not sure. He may have, already signed up to donate his brain after, hopefully he lives a long life after this, but after he does expire, that I think he may have donated himself to medical research too, but that's certainly been something that's very high on his priority list in terms of moving that conversation forward. Obviously, as you mentioned, his career ending that way, and his brother Brett, his career ended the same way with too much head trauma.
Before I let you go, Dave, I know one of your latest, and it's up at courierpostonline.com, part of the USA Today network, on the Flyers prospects, and specifically looking at some of the European guys. What's it like getting that kind of access to Goran Stub, the director of European scouting for the NHL Central Scouting Services, and Ron Hextall? I mean, it seems like, and I'd love to see something like this in Montreal, although the Canadians don't have any prospects really to talk about, but it's pretty cool access that you're able to get there.
Yeah, Hextall's been pretty good in terms of making himself available, certainly more than other managers in the league. Goran Stub, just a matter of finding an email address, and thankful that he was able to get back to me there. I'm trying to find a new analyst every week. I publish that piece in every Sunday's newspaper and try and cycle through almost every guy they have and find a theme. This week it was the goalies, whether it's the NCAA guys or guys in the American League. That's been one that we've seen a lot of positive response to from the fan base. And ever since Ron Hextall's become the general manager, that's really what he's been preaching is patience with young players, building through the draft. So certainly something that's garnered a lot of interest here in Philadelphia.
Hey, Carter Hart, those numbers I'm looking at here, 1.44 goals against average and a .957 save percentage. He's 19 years old, but I mean, he's the guy, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I didn't publish it, but it was funny when I asked Hextall about him. He said, yeah, he allowed 3 goals the other night. The nerve of him. Like that's just become such a rarity for Carter Hart. And I think that it was really important for him to be the guy for Canada after last year, the way that the World Juniors ended, where he ends up having the baton tossed back to him and losing in a shootout to the Americans. I think that he's a guy that has shown a lot of mental stability, but I think that was just huge for his confidence. I know he uses the same sports psychologist as Braden Holtby. And certainly, yeah, as you mentioned, the guy that everybody in Philadelphia is saying, you know, for all those people who have said the Flyers haven't had a real goalie since Ron Hextall, this is supposed to be the guy, Carter Hart. And this will be his last year in the Western League. He'll turn pro. I guess you can kind of leave the door open and say that if he blows those doors off in training camp, maybe he has a shot of breaking into the NHL. But I think the most likely scenario is that he ends up with the Lehigh Valley Phantoms in the American League and kind of takes the baby steps. But just in terms of what he's shown, especially this year, since, you know, returning from a bout of mononucleosis, he's just been unreal. So I wouldn't completely shut the door on him breaking into the NHL next year, but that's who everybody's looking at here. No
pressure, kid. That should be fun. All right. Thank you. Thanks, Dave. I appreciate it, man. Have a great night.
All right, Connor, good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
That's Dave Isaac, South Jersey Courier-Post. And I would imagine the people of Philadelphia, of course, will have an eye trained on the Flyers tomorrow as they try to get back into a playoff spot, like Dave was telling us, if they can beat the Washington Capitals, and a couple of stars line up tonight. There's also there's another thing happening in Philadelphia tomorrow, isn't there? Down at the Link, the Philadelphia Eagles going for it. Eagles fans with their dog masks and Nick Foles is their quarterback. Can the miracle happen? I mean, talking about miracles, was that something last week? The Minnesota Vikings walking off in an NFL playoff game, one of the craziest things I have ever seen. To say I'm excited about the NFL playoffs tomorrow might be a little bit of an understatement. But, of course, I always have time for the National Hockey League, and we've got plenty of games coming up tonight as well. Coming up next, we'll talk about one of the teams that's going to be in action later on tonight. The Battle of Ontario resumes. It's the Ottawa Senators and the Toronto Maple Leafs. Our friend Steve Dangle, host of the Steve Dangle podcast, contributor to Sportsnet and other places, is going to be joining us to talk Leafs and other stuff. That's what's coming up next here. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. We're also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com, Facebook Live, YouTube Live, and Periscope. We'll be back right after this.
Out to center now. 3-on-1 break for Ottawa. Down to the line and in. Pass in front. Here's a backhand chance. Scores! Tommy Pyatt, shoulder and in. Ottawa with a 1-goal lead.
Oh yes, that's Guy Boucher's boy, Tommy Pyatt. Really, Tommy? I thought it was just Tom, but whatever. Maybe they're close friends. That's the Ottawa Senators getting the job done against the Toronto Maple Leafs the other day. They renew hostilities tonight, a part of Hockey Day in Canada. The Toronto Maple Leafs at Ottawa to take on the lowly Sens. Can we say it? What a surprise, eh? You talk about turnarounds in the NHL. You've got Colorado, for example, somehow have turned their franchise around. One of the worst franchises in NHL history last year, and they're actually good this year. Meanwhile, the Ottawa Senators were conference finalists a year ago, and now they're terrible. And like any reasonable person, I blame it all on Matt Duchene. All right, Steve Dangle is our next guest, covering the Toronto Maple Leafs and the National Hockey League at large at Sportsnet. You can listen to the Steve Dangle podcast as well. Steve, how you doing?
Hey, I was doing better before you played the Leafs losing in a clip there, but overall pretty good, man. Pretty good.
Well, it wasn't me, to be fair, but yes, I apologize for that. I don't like having to bring up traumatic life experiences, but every once in a while, you got to do what you got to do. Overall,
go ahead and take a clip of Game 7 too.
We'll see if we can get to that on the way out. So yeah, that was Wednesday. And I know on Thursday the Leafs lost as well, and well, it's not exactly rosy right now, right? We're talking about 1, 2, 3, 4 straight losses, and there's a little bit of second guessing going on there, eh? It's Mike Babcock is a saint no more. It seems like fans are getting a little frustrated with the kindly old coach.
Yeah, the fans are getting pretty frustrated, but you know it's funny. After the last loss, I did some yelling and screaming of my own. A little bit of venting, and I think that's a given. I think there are definitely things to criticize about Mike Babcock, for sure. The fact he has Leo Komarov, leading all forwards in ice time on the team, like even in the top 5. He shouldn't even be in the top 5. That's ridiculous. Polak getting as much ice time as he's getting, or being in the lineup, as a matter of fact, I think is questionable. But I think some of the criticism towards Babcock is misguided energy. I took a step back and I looked at the last few games. And it's funny, around this time last year, kind of January, February was particularly bad, I remember, for the Leafs last year. They were just getting in their own way. And they were giving away games more than losing games. They were gifting games to their opponents. And I look at their last few games, silly mistakes, coughing up leads, but it's not this chip and chase, dump it in, boring, get an ice every 2 seconds style that we saw in December. They're actually playing more exciting than they were about a month ago. If they can just get past the brain farts, honestly, they could have won 6 of the last 7, except for the Tampa game. Huh. They were up against Columbus, and they lost. They made silly mistakes against the Sens. They lost. Against Philly, they had a huge lead, and they coughed it up and lost. I think they'll be fine once they get out of their own way, and I'm talking about the players.
We're talking to Steve Dangle Glynn, who is the host of the Steve Dangle podcast. You can check him out on YouTube. You can listen to the podcast, and you can also read his and see his work at sportsnet.ca. This is Hockey Primetime here on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. The show also streams live at hockeyprimetime.com. I know that you did a little bit of talking about this, but what did you make of what Frederik Andersen had to say the other day?
I thought Jeff O'Neill had a really good take on it, where, all that stuff is fine, but keep it in the locker room because no one said anything when you stunk out the joint at the beginning of last season. But no, I like it. And it's funny. It's the one thing I've said about Mike Babcock throughout his tenure as a Leafs coach is, generally speaking, you can take him at his word. Go watch his comments this morning at practice. It's up on the Leafs YouTube channel. Yesterday, and not so much right after the game. It was after he found out about Frederik Andersen's comments. He talked about how the Leafs were starting to snip at each other on the bench. And now it started to bleed into post-game, and after the game they were yelling at each other, and then Frederik Andersen did this too. But look at how Mike Babcock reacted to it. He's giddy. For some reason, he really likes this. And I think it's a matter of, I think if they're mad at each other, he knows at least some of them have bought in. So rather than having to be the bad cop all the time, the players are taking their turns being the bad cop as well. So I don't mind a little bit of feistiness. I don't mind a little bit of arguing, as long as they pull their heads out of their butts and stop giving the puck away in the final 3 minutes of the game and find a way to close it out.
Yeah, it's Frederik Andersen sort of calling out his teammates the other night, if in case you did miss it. And then James Van Riemsdyk kind of came out and backed him up, saying he appreciated his honesty. And I guess, I mean, Andersen in this room too he's almost like a grizzled veteran compared to how young so many of the guys on this roster are. And I guess JVR would sort of qualify in that regard as well. And they do have an elder statesman there in Patrick Marleau. But what do you think? Like, can you win with this much youth? I guess that's always the question. And we saw what they were able to do in the playoffs last year. And I would imagine that's going to be a huge learning experience for this group. But can a team this young, with this many young guys in sort of key roles, really expect to have championship aspirations?
Well, I mean, they looked great in the playoffs last year. They looked great at points last year. They looked great at the beginning of this season, albeit, playing a ridiculously unsustainable style. And then they took one of the most potent offenses in the league and they added Patrick Marleau to it. There's all this stuff about, the Leafs aren't scoring any goals. Their goal scoring's way down. Well, I don't expect it to stay that way. So I don't think youth is the biggest factor. Talent is not the biggest factor. Athleticism is not the biggest factor to me. I think it's mental. I think it's all mental with them. And maybe that's the youth part. Because, I mean, I don't know. I like to think I can handle things a little bit better than I did when I was, 19, 20, 21, like a lot of guys on this team are. I think once they get out of their own way, they should be fine. And I'll throw this in there, unless they're not, because they're the Leafs. We're, take, everything at face value. Oh, they got these guys on defense, these guys on forwards, they got a decent goalie in net. Yes. But what about the Leaf factor? So that's the part that scares me. What scares me is, let's pretend Babcock is totally wrong about all this. He's lost his marbles. He's no longer the great NHL coach we thought he was when he joined on. Well, he's now the Leafs coach forever and ever, amen. So they're just screwed for, I don't know, another half decade. But I mean, when it's been half a century, what's another half decade, right? Yeah,
I don't know. I wonder how much too, Steve, that they have a 12-point lead in the division right now. Like they can afford to be complacent in a way. And I mean, I know you don't want to see it, and you're watching 82 games, you're reacting to 82 games, but there's got to be something to this massive cushion they have in the division, doesn't there?
I think they would be playing a different style if they didn't have this ridiculous lead. But Mike Babcock is really, really being. I would love to hear what the players say about him behind closed doors, because there's no way they're a huge fan of him, and that's fine. Like you don't gotta love the guy who's barking orders at you. Not everyone.
I have a clip of the 2002 Game 7 if you want to play it.
The guy who's notoriously disliked at times. But the guy gets results. The one thing about complacency, again, is the Leafs factor. Dude, I've seen the leads evaporate too many times. The Sens are going to somehow get Andrew Hammond back for a conditional fifth, and they're going to all the way to the playoffs, and I'll be miserable in April again.
Well, I don't know.
So I don't. The Leafs have not even. They don't deserve the right to ever be complacent, ever, as a franchise, because of their history, and as a team because they're all, 14 years old. So they're not allowed to be complacent ever.
Yeah, but I mean, so many of the guys that are on this roster like weren't even alive when that stuff was happening. You know what I mean? They're a bunch of kids. It's a new day, man. And hey, listen, before I let you go, there's two things I want to do. First one is Erik Karlsson. The trade speculation sort of continues, and I know Sens fans hate hearing this stuff, so I'm sure you kind of love it. But what's your sort of dream scenario for what happens with Erik Karlsson?
He either becomes a Leaf or goes to the West. It's not fun playing Erik Karlsson. I don't like playing Erik Karlsson, and my team has to play Erik Karlsson tonight, and that sucks. But I am curious to see. My fantasy scenario is someone, ideally a team I don't like, and I don't know who that is because, I don't know, I try to be impartial. But after I just referred to the Leafs as my team. But my fantasy scenario is the trade deadline actually becomes exciting, and someone offers the sun and the moon for Erik Karlsson. My nightmare scenario, and I don't know, this is a dream and a nightmare. If the Leafs make a crazy trade for Karlsson, I'm going to be excited. Unless they don't win the cup with him and he leaves for another team. That's the crazy part. I think anyone who trades for him is a little bit out of their mind because they could just sign him potentially at the end of next summer. And if they don't get him, they can maybe attack Drew Doughty. And if they don't get him, they can maybe attack Oliver Ekman-Larsson. But that's the smart, logical way of looking at it.
Imagine
the trade deadline, not about logic. No, I want to see people go nuts and just shove adrenaline and Red Bull into my veins. Let's go. 9 first-round picks.
Yeah, exactly. And the Sens have like the power with Mike Hoffman too. Like the Sens kind of have the power to really spice things up if that is going to happen, or it's just going to be super boring and anticlimactic like it has been a little bit in the last couple of years. Here's a scenario. Imagine Nashville somehow got Erik Karlsson. There's no state tax in Tennessee. They've got money coming off the books. They have so many good contracts. I mean, like you look at that Nashville team, right? They have so many guys. Yossi's making $4 million a year. Ekholm's at like he's at 3.75. Ellis is making like $2 million or something. It's crazy, the contracts that this team has. Imagine they somehow got Erik Karlsson, like stuck him on the third pair.
That's just your Habs blood in you. Like you're just a masochist. You just want to hurt. Like, why would you do that to yourself? I'm not going to let you do that to yourself. Also, it's unfair that Nashville gets everything. Okay, like they used to be the scrappy underdog that I cheered for, and always the Blackhawks. Geez, and then last year they finally beat them. I'm like, good. Yeah, the Blackhawks can take their outdoor game and get lost. That they get every 6 months or whatever. But now I just look at their roster and I'm like, all right, shut up. You're too good for me to feel bad for you ever again.
Yeah,
and add Erik Karlsson to that? Come on.
Yeah, and they're winning games without Philip Forsberg. They've been winning games lately without Victor Arvidsson. Arvidsson, I believe, is coming back tonight. But yeah, no, it's a really nice team they've got there in Nashville. All right, but before I let you go, and because you asked for it, Steve, we have something for you here.
Curtis Joseph is 14 seconds away from his 14th career playoff shutout. Second this season. Make that 7 seconds. That's enough, Robert. Let the crowd take him home. They're going to move on.
There you go.
Hey,
Game 7.
What I was expecting at all. All right.
2002, man.
I'll come on the show whenever you want.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. I appreciate your time. Enjoy the game tonight.
Hey, you too. Watch the Leafs cough it up somehow.
All right. That's Steve Dangle, host of the Steve Dangle podcast. You can watch his LFR videos on YouTube, and you can see his work on SportsNet as well, a contributor at sportsnet.ca. This is Hockey Primetime. What do we have coming up next? Let's talk to Mary Clarke. We'll go around the National Hockey League with our friend Mary from SB Nation, covering the National Hockey League at large. That's coming up next. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM, NHL Network Radio, and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Hey, welcome back. This is Hockey Primetime on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. You can also watch the video stream on our Facebook page at Hockey Primetime. We're also on Periscope and YouTube Live all over the World Wide Web, doing things, and very happy to be doing them. Welcome back. We are just about 20 minutes or so away as we'll go into the coverage of the games tonight. You've got the Battle of Ontario. You've got the Bruins in Montreal. A rivalry that has, I guess, sort of lost a little bit of luster in the last couple of years. You think about what it was like at its height, and I think that was back in 2011 when you had the Chara Pacioretty incident and then an epic playoff series that ended in a Game 7 overtime, and the Bruins, of course, went on to win the Stanley Cup. But, it's not like that anymore between the Canadiens and the Bruins, and, two franchises that appear to be sort of headed in opposite directions. But the thing to watch tonight, if you can catch it, the Canadiens are going to be paying tribute to the iconic hockey writer Red Fisher, who passed away. And the Canadiens are probably about as good at doing that as any team is in pro sports. So I'm looking forward to seeing how they handle that. Right now, I'm looking forward to talking to our next guest. She covers the National Hockey League for SB Nation. You can read her work there, including one of her latest on Buffalo Sabres, Evander Kane. Are they asking for too much? I don't see why. The asking price for Evander Kane's too much. Look at what the Wild traded for Martin Hanzal last year. That was totally insane. Mary Clarke covering the NHL for SB Nation. Hello.
Hey, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for making time for us. So we appreciate it. So, so what do you say? Are the Sabres asking for too much?
I think they are. Evander Kane is a great hockey player, but he hasn't really scored. Like he's only scored 30 goals like once or twice in his NHL career. And I mean, part of that could be like where he's played, but also like I think like a first round pick, a prospect, a roster player, and a conditional pick all for somebody like that. I think it's just a bit too much. I think it might price some people out of the market, especially if like Max Pacioretty goes on the market. Like who knows? Like there could be other players out there that other teams may be able to get for cheaper than Evander Kane.
He's good though. I mean, that's for sure. It's crazy that he's only 26. Like he's been around for a long time. He's as you point out in your piece, he's been truly one of the only bright spots for this awful Sabres team. I mean, I'm sorry, Buffalo, but the proof's in the pudding here. But I guess, I mean, when you have this much time, and I guess that's what the strategy is, you've got like 5-6 weeks until the trade deadline. Why not ask for the moon now and sort of let the chips fall where they may, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I understand why that they're asking for so much, because you're right. It's been another miserable season in Buffalo, and it sucks for them. I think that many have projected, including myself, that they'd be better this year. I think that they'd have taken a step forward, if not, playoffs, but like, better than they are now. So I see why that they're trying to deal him for so much, but I think that's a good point, that shoot for the moon basically and see where you can get people down from there.
How much of a believer are you in the whole Evander Kane as a problem or distraction, and that being something that might scare teams away?
I mean, this is the NHL, so they do these types of things where any like sniff of a problem in a player they might not go for. But I don't know if I necessarily believe all of it. I mean, I know we had that altercation in practice the other day, but I don't necessarily believe that he's a problem. I don't know if he's just been stuck in some unfortunate circumstances, but there have been things that have like come up about him. So it may be like, so it's very possible that teams could not take a flyer on him basically because of these issues. So I don't know. I'm not sure if he's squeaky clean, or if he's, as bad as everybody says. There could be a middle ground. Who knows? And
I would imagine that a smart general manager might be able to use that to minimize the price that he would pay for a guy like that. Whether it's fair or not, that is something that you can use to your advantage. And guys like David Poile have been doing for quite a while. So it's going to be fun to see. He's number one on TSN's trade board, or whatever it is, at tsn.ca. We're chatting with Mary Clarke with SB Nation covering the National Hockey League. This is Hockey Primetime. My name is Conor McKenna. We're on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. The show is also streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. All right, so moving on, I wanted to ask you about the Pittsburgh Penguins, if that's all right. We're just going to this is what we did last time we had you on, right? We just like bounced around and talked a whole bunch of seemingly unrelated topics. So let's talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. This team, who were quite bad for a while, and there was guys like me talking about how maybe this was a changing of the guard in the Eastern Conference, and wouldn't it be funny if the Capitals finally were able to get to the Stanley Cup final because Pittsburgh just flat out missed the playoffs and they didn't have to slay the proverbial dragon. Well, don't look now, but there's Pittsburgh, and they could be slated for a first-round matchup with the Washington Capitals, the way things are going right now. What do you think of these sort of Jekyll and Hyde Penguins, and do you think they figured it out?
I feel like it's kind of expected. I mean, they were coming off two consecutive Stanley Cup wins, so they played more games than anybody has over the past 2 years, and they lost a lot of people in the off season. I mean, they lost Fleury, they lost like Matt Cullen, and they lost a lot of their depth that made them so dangerous. But of course, the Penguins always find a way. Jim Rutherford always finds a way, basically, to get the most out of his team. And there's been a lot of good good call-ups that they've had. It's just, and it's really starting to mesh now. The thing is, though, the Metropolitan Division's so tight that they have 2 games up on the Flyers, but they're only one point up in the standings. So the amount of games played, I guess it's going to be a thing to look for as we start to head onto the final parts of the season, is where these will the Penguins have played too many games, or it's going to be tough. I mean, you can't count out the Penguins because they have such championship caliber players on their team, but it's the Metropolitan Division is tough. So it's incredible that they've already started to make some headway.
With Mary Clarke, and now again, we will change topics here completely. I'm looking at a story on tsn.ca about potential names for the yet to actually exist NHL franchise in Seattle. And I will now tell you these names, and you'll tell me if you think any of them are good. The Seattle Cougars, the Seattle Eagles, the Seattle Emeralds, the Seattle Evergreens, the Seattle Firebirds, the Seattle Kraken. Wow, like House Greyjoy style. The Seattle Rainiers, the Seattle Renegades, the Seattle Sea Lions, the Seattle Seals, I should say, the Seattle Sockeyes, the Seattle Totems, and the Seattle Whales. Are any of those acceptable names for an NHL team in your estimation?
I'm personally on the Seattle Kraken team. I think that's such a unique name. It really stood out to me when I read the list, just because it felt so out of left field that it went back around all the way so I was a fan of it immediately. I think it's neat. I personally I think that's such a unique name in this league. The Seals are also good because the Seattle Seals alliteration thing. It just sounds nice rolling off the tongue. I also like the Firebirds just because the imagery is cool. I can see them doing a lot of cool things with it. There's definitely some misses, like the Sockeyes. I mean, it's a fish. It just feels strange. And yeah, the evergreens are trees. So I mean, yeah, there's trees in Seattle, but I don't know, some of them, the imagery I can think of for the Kraken and the Firebirds and stuff like that is so much cooler than just trees.
I feel like we need to wait and see what happens to Theon Greyjoy in the final episodes of Game of Thrones before we make any big decisions about Krakens.
That's a good point,
right? But I mean, of course, we're going pretty deep on the references here. So that was a heavy Game of Thrones, a Song of Ice and Fire reference here. We try to get at least one in every week here on Hockey Primetime. This is Hockey Primetime. I'm Conor McKenna, and nice to be hanging out with you on this Saturday night. We're chatting with Mary Clarke of SB Nation. Going around the National Hockey League and hitting on all the important stories, as you can tell, like the one that we just mentioned there about the Seattle names. All right, last question for you. The Calgary Flames are looking really good right now, and I'm on Hockey Day in Canada. I'm going to do my sort of rankings of the Canadian teams in the next segment, but I did want to ask you this. Which Canadian NHL team do you think is the best? I think we can strike Montreal, Ottawa, Edmonton, and Vancouver off the list. So out of Calgary, Winnipeg, and Toronto, which do you think is the closest to being a Stanley Cup caliber team?
Oh, man. If you asked me at the beginning of the season, I probably would have said Toronto because of their incredible start last year when they put together such a run that went into the playoffs. But I think it has to be Winnipeg. I mean, they're missing some key players right now, but they seem to have figured it out. They've got they figured out their goaltending. They've got some incredible goal scorers. I mean, I know Patrick Laine hasn't is kind of slumped a little bit in his sophomore year, but I think he's doing a bit better recently. But you also can't discount the Flames. I mean, you're talking about before that they had been flying high over the past week or so. And Mike Smith has been playing some of the best hockey of his career, and that's really surprised me considering he came from Arizona. I mean, I don't know if it's the system that did him wrong there, but he's really surprised me in coming out this year. And so I definitely think that they could be somebody to watch if the trends continue and he keeps it up.
Yeah, 7 in a row for the Flames. And yeah, I won't reveal because I have to tease that and pay it off in the next segment. I will reveal who I think is the best Canadian team in just a few minutes. Mary, a pleasure to chat with you as usual. I appreciate it. Enjoy what's left of the weekend.
Of course. Thank you. It's lovely to be on.
That is Mary Clarke of SB Nation. I am Conor McKenna. This is Hockey Primetime. How are you? You doing all right? Coming up next, a couple things that I want to get off my chest. We're going to go through. It's Hockey Day in Canada, so I figured we will do a State of the Union, so to speak. All 7 Canadian NHL teams. How are they doing? Where are they at right now? I will offer an extremely subjective and probably bad analysis of a bunch of teams that I don't actually cover or watch on a daily basis. Can you wait? Also, I got something I want to get off my chest about the All-Star Weekend festivities coming up in Tampa. So let's get that done. Coming up next, we wrap things up. It's Saturday. This is Hockey Prime Time on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio and streaming live at hockeyprimetime.com. Nice to be back with you. This is Hockey Prime Time. It's Saturday night. We're almost there. We're going to turn it over to TSN 690's coverage of the Montreal Canadiens hosting the Boston Bruins in just a couple of minutes' time on SiriusXM NHL Network Radio. We'll be able to hear the dulcet tones of Dan Robertson and the analysis of Sergio Momesso. That's coming up in just a few minutes. I know those guys, and they're doing all right. Geez, what a grind this season has been here in Montreal, and it just wears on you when the team. especially, I mean, believe you me, I talk about the Canadians like a lot. I spend a lot of time talking Habs. I do a 4-hour radio show every day here in Montreal on TSN 690, and it's mostly Canadians, right? I mean, it's the flagship. We're the broadcaster of the Canadians. The fans want Habs talk, but it really is sort of a situation of like, what do you say? What can you say? It's just we got like 35 games to go, and it has just been a brutal season. And there's really, maybe worst of all, there's no glimmer of hope on the horizon. It appears that things will probably get worse than they are right now. And if you're sort of clinging to the hope that the Canadians somehow land the #1 pick and get Rasmus Dahlin, I mean, odds are they won't do that. But if that's what you're hanging on to, then they go out and they beat the Washington Capitals in Washington last night and then sort of screw that up as well. So it's all bad. 13th in the Eastern Conference right now. So on Hockey Day in Canada here on Hockey Primetime, I figured we'd do a sort of a state of the Canadian NHL franchise deal and see who's doing what and how they're doing and sort of ranking the 7 Canadian teams. So I figure we'll start out west, since we often sort of forget about our friends on the West Coast, and they feel like there's this Eastern bias and nobody cares about the West. We're going west. Vancouver, your team's terrible. I'm sorry. The rebuild is ongoing in Vancouver, and I think they've still got a ways to go. I'm going to be fascinated to see what happens as far as who's the next general manager of that team, because I think Jim Benning is probably not long for this world. They do have Brock Besser. That's something to be excited about, something to look forward to, but they got a long way to go. Calgary, Cup contenders, fantastic team, 7 wins in a row. They're getting the job done. So I've got them right there on my list. I believe that's a Stanley Cup contending team. Edmonton, going back to the drawing board, and you want to talk about general managers whose jobs might be in jeopardy. Do you trust Peter Chiarelli to fix what's going on out there in Edmonton? I would certainly be wary if I was an Oilers fan. You've got a Cup contending team in Winnipeg. We've talked about this on the show before. They're going to be buyers at the trade deadline. They're going to have like $30 million of cap space on deadline day. That's insane. And they're also going to get Mark Scheifele back at some point, and that's going to be huge for them as well. But that's a real nice team in Winnipeg with assets, with draft picks. I think they're going to be buyers, and I'm going to be fascinated to see what they do as the deadline approaches. Tipping point in Toronto, I expect the Leafs to get back on track. The reason I think the Leafs have lost 4 games in a row and came off the bye with a couple of overtime losses, I don't think it matters that much. They've got a 12-point lead. They're not going to miss the playoffs. It's not going to happen, despite what traumatized Leafs fans might tell you. Finishing it off with Ottawa, just a catastrophe. What the heck happened to that team this year in Montreal? I think it's about as bad as it gets. As we mentioned, there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Coming up, we've got Boston-Montreal here on Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. Don't forget, also later on tonight, you've got an all-Canadian matchup, Vancouver and Edmonton, 2 franchises that are quite bad. Honestly, Kid Rock at the All-Star game, I really don't understand this. It's like the NHL. Come on, guys. I understand this is NHL Network Radio. Why is Kid Rock performing at the All-Star game? It's you got a softball right up the middle. Just make contact here. This just seemed like such a tone-deaf and bad idea. The publicity is bad. The reaction is bad. It's just extremely unfortunate. I apologize, but I think it's a bad move. Thank you to everybody for being a part of the show. Thank you to our producer, Laura Saba, our executive producer, Sam Wu. That's it for me. Enjoy the Montreal Canadiens game tonight, and I can't wait to talk to you in 2 weeks. Have a great night. Thanks, man.